December 24, 1944, French villagers watched in complete disbelief as American soldiers unloaded crates of food they hadn't seen in 4 years: oranges, chocolate, real butter, and even ice cream for their starving children. One widowed schoolteacher who had survived the brutal German occupation broke down in tears, unable to comprehend why these foreign soldiers would give so freely without demanding anything in return. What did these American troops understand about power and humanity that would forever shatter everything the French thought they knew about conquerors? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. December 1944. The small Norman village of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont sat like a broken toy beneath gray winter skies. 5 years of war had stripped the color from everything. The stone buildings still stood, but their walls were pockmarked with bullet holes that looked like dark, angry eyes. Some houses had no roofs, others had missing walls where you could see right into empty rooms. Rubble filled the corners of streets where bombs had fallen months before during the liberation. Nobody had the energy or materials to clean it up. The village had been free from German occupation for only 6 months, but freedom felt strange and uncertain. People walked with their heads down. They didn't smile much. They had learned during 4 years of occupation that smiling could be dangerous, that trusting anyone could get you killed or worse. Now the Germans were gone, but the habits of fear remained like ghosts that followed everyone through the cold December streets. Marie Dubois stood at the front of her tiny classroom in the village school, watching 23 children scratch words onto slates with broken pieces of chalk. She was 32 years old, though she looked older. Her dark hair, pulled back in a simple bun, showed streaks of gray that hadn't been there when the war started. Her husband Philippe had died in 1940 during the German invasion. She wore his wedding ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her worn dress. The dress had been mended so many times that it was hard to tell what color it had been originally. The children in her classroom were thin. Not just thin, skeletal. Their cheeks were hollow, their eyes seemed too large for their faces. Young Claude Moreau sat in the front row, 8 years old but small enough to pass for 5. His parents had been killed in a bombing raid. Now he lived with distant cousins who had barely enough food for themselves. Claude's wrists looked like sticks. His shirt hung loose on his body like a scarecrow's clothes. He had never known Christmas the way children should know it, with warmth and food and joy. All he had ever known was cold, hunger, and fear. Father Benoit, the village priest, was 58 but moved like a man of 80. The war had aged him terribly. He had watched neighbors collaborate with the Germans to survive. He had hidden resistance fighters in his church and prayed they wouldn't be discovered. He had buried too many people, young and old, patriots and collaborators, soldiers and civilians. His faith had been tested in ways he never imagined possible. Now he spent his days trying to hold together a community that had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. The village had no electricity most days. The power lines had been cut during the fighting. The rail lines that once brought goods from Paris were twisted metal and broken bridges. The factories that once employed half the village were burned-out shells. People grew what food they could in tiny gardens, but winter had arrived and the gardens were frozen and bare. The black market thrived for those who had something to trade, but most people had nothing left to trade. Food was the constant obsession. Every conversation eventually turned to it. Who had managed to get a few eggs? Has anyone heard of flour available in the next village? Was it true that someone had killed their last chicken for Sunday dinner? Children went to bed hungry every night. Breakfast was thin soup made from whatever could be scrounged. Lunch was often just a piece of bread so hard you had to soak it in water to chew it. Dinner was more thin soup. Nobody had seen an orange in 4 years. Chocolate was a fairy tale, something grandparents talked about from before the war. Real butter? That was a dream. Sugar existed only in memories. The children didn't even remember what these things tasted like. For them, hunger was normal. Hunger was life. Then the Americans came. They had been in the area for months, of course, ever since the liberation. Their supply depot sat 3 kilometers outside the village. The Americans mostly kept to themselves. Sometimes their trucks rumbled through the village square on their way to somewhere else. Sometimes a few soldiers would stop at the village cafe for wine, paying with strange, colorful money and trying to speak French with terrible accents that made them sound like children. The villagers watched them with suspicion and confusion. These were supposed to be their liberators, but nobody knew what to make of them. Then, in mid-December, something strange started happening. American soldiers began appearing in the village more often. They walked around the square, looking at buildings, taking notes, pointing and talking to each other in English. They smiled at the children. They waved at old women. They seemed almost cheerful. This made no sense to the French villagers. Soldiers weren't supposed to be cheerful. Soldiers were supposed to be hard and cold and dangerous. Rumors spread like wildfire through the small village. Madame Laurent, who ran the bakery with almost no flour, whispered to customers that the Americans were planning something at the church hall. Monsieur Petit, who had lost both sons in the war, said he saw American trucks unloading lumber and tools near the village center. Father Benoit was approached by an American officer with a translator who asked permission to use the church hall for a special event on Christmas Eve. What kind of event? Father Benoit had asked suspiciously. A dinner, the officer said through the translator, for the children, all the children in the village. Father Benoit stared at him. Why? The officer smiled. Because it's Christmas. That night, Father Benoit told Marie about the conversation. They sat in the cold rectory, their breath making small clouds in the air. Marie wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. What do they want? She asked. Her voice was hard with distrust. Nobody does something for nothing. The Germans taught us that. I don't know, Father Benoit admitted. But I gave them permission. What else could I do? Marie looked out the window at the dark village. We've been occupied before, she said quietly. We know how this works. They give you something, then they take something bigger. They smile at you, then they hurt you. Why would these Americans be any different? But even as she spoke, she remembered something. That afternoon, she had seen an American soldier, a black man in uniform, kneel down to talk to little Claude. He had given Claude something. Claude had run to her afterward, his eyes wide, holding a small brown bar wrapped in paper. Chocolate. Real chocolate. The soldier hadn't asked for anything. He had just smiled and walked away. Marie had broken off a tiny piece for Claude and watched his face transform with wonder as he tasted something sweet for the first time in his memory. What kind of soldiers gave chocolate to starving children and asked for nothing in return? What were these Americans really planning? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The next morning, 3 American trucks rolled into the village square. The sound of their engines echoed off the stone buildings like thunder. Marie stood at her classroom window with her students pressed around her, all of them watching. The trucks were enormous, bigger than any vehicles the villagers owned. They were painted in dull green and had white stars on their sides. When they stopped, 6 American soldiers jumped out, moving with purpose and energy that seemed impossible to the tired French villagers. An American sergeant stood in the center of the square with a young French-speaking soldier beside him. The translator cupped his hands around his mouth and called out in accented French. Attention, please. The United States Army wishes to invite all children of this village to a Christmas dinner on December 24th. All children are welcome. No payment required. This is a gift. Marie felt her students stirring with excitement around her, but she placed a hand on Claude's shoulder. Stay here, she said firmly. She left the classroom and walked quickly across the square to where Father Benoit was already approaching the Americans. Other villagers emerged from houses and shops, gathering in small clusters, whispering nervously to each other. "What is the meaning of this?" Marie demanded when she reached the sergeant. Her voice was sharp with suspicion. "What do you want from us?" The translator spoke to the sergeant, who smiled. A big, friendly smile that Marie didn't trust at all. Through the translator, he said, "Ma'am, we don't want anything. We just want to give your children a proper Christmas dinner. That's all." "Nobody gives something for nothing," Marie replied. Her hands were clenched at her sides. "We have been occupied for 4 years. We know how soldiers work. You give us food, then what? What do you take from us?" The sergeant's smile faded. He looked genuinely confused. He spoke slowly, waiting for the translator. "Ma'am, I promise you, we're not taking anything. We have extra supplies. We have good food. We want to share it with kids who've had a rough time. My own daughter is back in Ohio. She's about the same age as some of these children. I'd want someone to feed her if she was hungry. That's all this is." Marie stared at him, searching his face for lies. She found none, but that almost made it worse. It made no sense. The soldiers began unloading the trucks. Marie watched, and her breath caught in her throat. Wooden crates came out one after another. The soldiers pried them open right there in the square, and the villagers pressed closer to see what was inside. Canned ham! Dozens of cans, each one bigger than Marie's fist. In one crate alone, there must have been 50 cans. The Germans had taken every scrap of meat from the village for 4 years. Now here were these Americans with enough ham to feed everyone twice over. Another crate held potatoes. Real potatoes, not the sad, rotting ones people sometimes found in root cellars. These were clean and firm and perfect. There must have been 100 pounds of them. Flour, white flour, not the gray sawdust mixture the bakery had been using. 5 large bags of it. Sugar. Marie actually gasped when she saw it. Sugar, in white paper bags, clean and pure. She hadn't seen real sugar since 1940. Butter. Not margarine, not lard, but real yellow butter in rectangular blocks wrapped in paper. Marie counted 6 blocks before she had to look away because tears were stinging her eyes. Then came the oranges. An American soldier lifted a crate and the side panel broke open. Oranges spilled onto the cobblestones, rolling in every direction. Bright orange spheres like small suns on the gray stone. Children shrieked and started to chase them, but their parents held them back. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. One orange rolled to Marie's feet. She bent down and picked it up. It was heavy in her hand, cool and dimpled. She brought it close to her face and smelled it. The scent was so sweet and fresh it made her dizzy. She looked at Claude, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, his eyes huge and fixed on the orange in her hand. "Claude has never tasted an orange," she whispered to Father Benoit, who had come to stand beside her. "He is 8 years old and has never even seen one." More crates appeared. Green beans in cans, cranberry sauce, milk powder in large tins, candy canes, red and white striped sticks that the American soldiers handed out to children brave enough to approach. The children held them like precious jewels, not sure whether they were allowed to eat them. The Americans worked with speed that amazed the villagers. They had done this before. You could tell by how smoothly they moved. Within 2 hours, they had assembled tables made of wooden planks and sawhorses in the church hall. They strung electric lights, powered by a generator they had brought on one of the trucks. The generator hummed and chugged, and suddenly the dim church hall blazed with light brighter than anything the villagers had seen in years. Some of the younger children actually cried at the sight, scared by so much brightness. A field kitchen arrived on another truck, a complete mobile kitchen with ovens, stoves, and huge pots. 3 army cooks set it up in the courtyard behind the church. Soon, the smell of roasting meat drifted through the village. Marie stood in the church hall, watching Americans hammer and saw and arrange things. One soldier was hanging paper snowflakes from the rafters. Another was setting up a small Christmas tree in the corner. Where had they gotten a Christmas tree? A young American soldier with red hair and freckles approached her. He couldn't have been more than 19 years old. Through gestures and broken French, he introduced himself. His name was Tommy O'Malley. He was from a place called Brooklyn. "Why are you doing this?" Marie asked him in slow, careful English. She had learned some English in school before the war. Tommy's face brightened. "You speak English? That's swell." He thought for a moment, trying to find the right words. "My little sister, see, she's back home in Brooklyn. She's 7. Same age as lots of these kids here. And I just kept thinking, what if it was her? What if she'd gone through what these French kids have been through? I'd want somebody to give her a good Christmas, you know? Something to smile about." Marie felt something crack inside her chest. "You do not know these children," she said softly. "Don't have to know 'em to know they deserve better than what they got," Tommy replied. He smiled at her, and it was such an open, honest smile that Marie had to look away. She walked to the back of the hall where Father Benoit was standing, watching everything with an expression of wonder on his weathered face. "Do you see this?" he whispered to her. "Do you see what they are doing?" "I see it, but I do not understand it." "This is not conquest," Father Benoit said. His voice shook slightly. "This is not an occupation. This is something else entirely. This is generosity, pure generosity. I have been a priest for 34 years, and I have never seen anything like this." That afternoon, an American corporal found Claude sitting on the church steps, watching the preparations with hungry eyes. The corporal was a black man, tall and gentle-looking. He knelt down beside Claude and pulled something from his pocket, a chocolate bar in brown paper wrapping with the word Hershey's printed on it. Claude looked at the chocolate, then at the soldier, then back at the chocolate. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took it. His hands were shaking. The soldier showed him how to unwrap it. Claude broke off a small square and put it in his mouth. His eyes went wide. He had never tasted anything so sweet, so rich, so impossibly good. A tear ran down his cheek. The soldier patted his shoulder gently and walked away, asking for nothing. Marie had watched the whole thing. Now she sat down on the steps beside Claude, who was staring at the chocolate bar like it was made of gold. "They are different," Claude whispered. "They are not like the Germans." "No," Marie admitted quietly, "they are not." December 24th arrived cold and clear. Marie woke before dawn in her small room above the school. She had barely slept. All night she had thought about what was going to happen today. She still didn't fully understand why the Americans were doing this. In her experience, soldiers took things, they demanded things, they used their power to make people afraid. But these Americans seemed to operate by completely different rules, rules she had never encountered before. She dressed in her best dress, which wasn't saying much. It was dark blue wool, mended at the elbows and hem, but it was clean and presentable. She pinned her hair up carefully and put on the small silver earrings her mother had given her years ago. If the Americans were going to give the children a special dinner, she would at least look proper for it. The church hall had been completely transformed. Marie stood in the doorway at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and could barely recognize the space. Paper snowflakes hung everywhere, spinning slowly in the warm air rising from the heating stoves the Americans had brought. The Christmas tree in the corner was decorated with handmade ornaments, paper stars, strings of popcorn, even a few glass balls that must have come from America. Candles flickered on every windowsill, their light reflecting off the windows and making the whole room glow. Long tables stretched the length of the hall, covered with white sheets the Americans had provided. Each place had a real plate, a real fork and knife, and a cloth napkin folded neatly beside it. The room smelled like heaven. Roasting turkey, fresh bread, something sweet and cinnamon-scented that Marie couldn't identify. After years of thin soup and moldy bread, these smells were almost painful in their richness. 107 children entered the hall between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. Marie had helped count them. Every child in the village and several from neighboring farms. They came scrubbed as clean as their families could manage, wearing their best clothes even when their best clothes were patched and worn. They entered quietly, almost afraid, their eyes wide as they took in the decorated hall and the tables heavy with food. Claude walked beside Marie. He had never looked so small and fragile. His too large shirt had been washed and his hair combed down flat. He gripped Marie's hand tightly as they found seats at one of the long tables. He kept staring at the plate in front of him, at the fork and knife, as if they might disappear if he looked away. American soldiers stood along the walls, 20 of them, in clean uniforms. They weren't carrying weapons. They were just standing there, smiling, some of them looking a little nervous. Marie realized with surprise that they wanted this to go well. They actually cared whether the children enjoyed themselves. Father Benoit stood at the front of the hall. His voice was strong when he spoke, stronger than Marie had heard it in years. "Children of Sainte Marie du Mont," he said in French, "we gather today to celebrate Christmas. We gather to remember that even in the darkest times, light can return. We gather to give thanks." He paused, then added, "And we gather to thank our American friends who have shown us great kindness." An American chaplain in uniform stood beside Father Benoit. He spoke in English, and the young translator repeated his words in French. "We are honored to share this meal with you. We hope it brings you joy. Merry Christmas." Then the soldiers began serving the food. They came with enormous platters and bowls, moving between the tables with military precision. Turkey, great golden birds that had been roasting all day, their skin crispy and glistening. The soldiers carved thick slices and placed them on each child's plate. Mashed potatoes, smooth and white, topped with a pat of real butter that slowly melted into golden pools. Gravy, rich and brown. Green beans with slivers of almonds. Cranberry sauce, dark red and sweet. Fresh rolls, still warm, so soft that when you tore them open, steam rose up. Marie watched Claude receive his plate. The turkey slice alone was bigger than any piece of meat he had eaten in a year, maybe ever. He looked at it, then looked up at Marie with an expression she couldn't read. Fear? Wonder? Disbelief? "It's all right," she whispered. "You can eat it. It's yours." Claude picked up his fork. His hand was shaking. He cut a small piece of turkey and put it in his mouth. He chewed slowly. Then tears began running down his face. He didn't make a sound. He just sat there, chewing and crying, and after a moment he cut another piece and ate that too. All around the hall, children were eating. Some ate slowly, savoring every bite. Some ate so fast Marie worried they would make themselves sick. Some cried like Claude. Some laughed. Some just stared at their plates in amazement between bites. The sound in the hall grew from whispers to normal conversation to something approaching joy. The black corporal who had given Claude chocolate days before now moved through the hall with a pitcher of milk, filling glasses. Real milk, cold and white. When he reached Claude's place, he poured the glass full and gave the boy a gentle smile. Claude looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude and said in halting English, "Thank you." The corporal's eyes got shiny. He nodded and moved on. Marie found she couldn't eat much. Her throat felt tight. She kept watching the Americans. watching how they served the children with such care, how they smiled when a child asked for seconds, how they brought out more food when platters ran low. This wasn't my duty. This wasn't following orders. This was something else entirely. Then the soldiers brought out dessert, apple pie. Dozens of pies, their crusts golden brown, still warm, smelling of cinnamon and butter and sugar. Each child received a slice on a small plate. Then came something impossible: ice cream. Real ice cream, brought in special containers packed with ice from the American depot. The soldiers moved quickly, scooping white ice cream onto each slice of pie before it could melt. Claude took one bite of pie with ice cream and made a sound Marie had never heard from him before, a sound of pure happiness. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked like what he was supposed to be, a child, just a child, experiencing something wonderful. Marie felt something break inside her. Not break apart, but break open. Years of hardness, of suspicion, of learned distrust cracked and fell away. She stood up from her seat and walked to where Corporal Washington was scooping ice cream. She touched his arm, and he turned to her. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why do you do this for us? What do you want?" He set down the ice cream scoop. His face was kind. "Ma'am," he said in careful English, knowing she could understand, "where I come from, we believe everybody deserves a Christmas, especially kids who've been through what these children have been through. We don't want anything. We just want them to have this memory. We want them to know that somebody cared." Marie looked around the hall, at children eating and laughing, American soldiers serving food with smiles on their faces, at Father Benoit standing with the American chaplain, both of them watching the scene with tears in their eyes, at little Claude, who had finished his pie and was running his finger across the plate to get every last bit of sweetness. She thought about the Germans, how they had taken everything, how they had made people afraid, how they had used their power to control and hurt and destroy. That was what she understood about power. Power was a weapon. Power was something you used against other people. But this was power used differently. The Americans had food and resources and strength. They could have kept it all for themselves. They could have demanded payment. They could have used it to control the French villagers. Instead, they gave it freely to hungry children and asked for nothing in return. "What kind of country raises men like you?" Marie whispered. Corporal Washington smiled. "A country that believes in second chances, ma'am. A country that believes tomorrow can be better than today. We're not perfect, not by a long shot, but we try to do it right when we can." Marie walked back to her seat. She sat down beside Claude, who was watching other children play a game an American soldier had taught them. Claude's cheeks had color in them for the first time since she had known him. He looked fed, he looked warm, he looked happy. She had been wrong about everything. She had thought she understood the world. She had thought she knew how power worked, how soldiers behaved, what occupation meant. But America was showing her something completely different. They were showing her that strength could be gentle, that power could serve instead of dominate, that even in a world torn apart by war, kindness could still exist. Marie put her face in her hands and wept. The war ended 5 months later. By May of 1945, the guns were finally silent across all of Europe. The Americans moved on to other places, other duties, other missions. The supply depot outside Sainte-Marie-du-Mont closed down. The trucks rolled away. The soldiers who had organized the Christmas dinner shipped out to occupation duty in Germany or went home to America. They left behind a village that was still poor, still rebuilding, still scarred by years of war. But they also left behind something else. They left behind a memory that would never fade. Marie kept a photograph on her fireplace mantel for the rest of her life. An American soldier had taken it on Christmas Eve 1944 with a small camera. The photograph showed the church hall full of children at the long tables. You could see plates piled with turkey and potatoes. You could see American soldiers in the background serving food. In the foreground, you could see Claude, his face caught in a moment of pure joy as he took his first bite of apple pie. The photograph was black and white, but Marie always saw it in color when she looked at it. She saw the golden turkey, the white potatoes, the red cranberry sauce. She saw hope. The village rebuilt slowly through the late 1940s and into the 50s. The rubble was cleared away. Roofs were replaced. Windows were replaced. The railroad started running again. Electricity became reliable. Food became available in the shops. Not abundant, not like America, but enough. People stopped going to bed hungry every night. Children started to grow properly again, their cheeks filling out, their bodies getting stronger. Claude grew up. He stayed in Sainte-Marie-du-Mont and went to the local school, where Marie continued to teach. He was a quiet boy, serious and thoughtful. He studied hard. When he was 18, he went to the university in Caen on a scholarship. He studied education because, he said, he wanted to be like Madame Dubois. He wanted to help children the way she had helped him. In 1960, Claude returned to Sainte-Marie-du-Mont as a teacher himself. He was 24 years old, tall and healthy, no longer the skeletal orphan who had cried over a slice of turkey. He taught history to children who had been born after the war, children who had never known occupation or hunger or fear. On the first day of every December, he would tell his students about Christmas Eve 1944. "I want you to understand something," he would say, standing at the front of the classroom in the same building where Marie had once taught him. "I was 8 years old, and I had never tasted an orange. I had never eaten real chocolate. I didn't know what it felt like to have a full stomach. The war had taken everything from us. And then these American soldiers came, and they didn't have to help us. They didn't have to care, but they did." He would pause and look at his students, these comfortable children with their full lunchboxes and warm coats. They organized a dinner for every child in this village. They brought food we hadn't seen in years. They served us themselves. They asked for nothing in return. That night taught me something I have never forgotten. It taught me that power doesn't have to hurt people. Strength doesn't have to be cruel. The strongest people are often the kindest people. The Americans could have ignored us. They could have kept their abundance to themselves. Instead, they shared it with strangers. That is what real strength looks like. His students would listen quietly. Some of them had grandparents who remembered the war. Some of them had heard stories. But hearing it from Monsieur Moreau, seeing the emotion in his eyes, made it real in a way that history books never could. Father Benoit lived until 1968. He was 82 when he died, surrounded by people who loved him. In his final years, he often spoke about Christmas 1944. He had kept a journal throughout his life, and his entry from December 24, 1944, was long and detailed. He wrote, "I witnessed grace tonight. Not the grace of theology or doctrine, but the grace of simple human goodness. These young Americans, far from their homes and families, chose to spend their Christmas Eve serving food to French children they had never met before. They asked for nothing, they wanted nothing, except to bring joy to children who had known too much sorrow. This is what faith looks like in action. This is what it means to love your neighbor. I have been a priest for 34 years, but tonight these soldiers taught me something new about what it means to be truly good." In 1962, Marie received an unexpected letter. It was from an organization in America that arranged cultural exchanges between French and American teachers. They wanted to bring a group of French educators to the United States for 6 weeks to observe American schools and teaching methods. They had heard about Marie's long career and her work rebuilding education in Normandy after the war. Would she be interested in participating? Marie was 50 years old. She had never left France. The idea of traveling to America felt impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. But she said yes. That summer, she flew across the Atlantic Ocean in an airplane, another first for her. She landed in New York City and spent 2 weeks there before traveling to other American cities. Everywhere she went, she was overwhelmed by the abundance. The grocery stores with their endless aisles of food. The cars, so many cars, filling every street. The houses with electricity and running water and central heating. The schools with new books and supplies and equipment. The restaurants served portions so large that people couldn't finish them. She understood then. The soldiers who had come to Sainte-Marie-du-Mont hadn't been exceptions. They hadn't been unusually generous individuals. They were products of this country, this overwhelming, abundant, optimistic country that believed tomorrow would be better than today. They had grown up with enough, so sharing seemed natural to them. They had been raised to believe that helping others was just what you did. One evening in New York, Marie attended a veterans reunion at a hotel in Manhattan. The organization that had brought her to America thought she might like to meet some soldiers who had served in France. The room was full of middle-aged men in suits, talking and laughing, remembering their youth. And then she saw him. Corporal Washington. Except he wasn't a corporal anymore. He was just James Washington, a grandfather from Philadelphia who worked as a postal clerk. His hair was gray now and he wore glasses, but she recognized him immediately. She walked across the room. Her heart was pounding. When she reached him, she said in English that was much better than it had been 18 years ago, "Excuse me, you are James Washington. You served in Normandy." He turned and looked at her, puzzled at first. Then his eyes widened. "Sainte-Marie-du-Mont," he said. "You're the teacher, from the village, Christmas 1944. "Yes," Marie said. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You gave us Christmas. You gave us hope. You fed our children when they were starving. You showed us kindness when we had forgotten what kindness looked like." James's own eyes got wet. "How are the kids?" he asked. "How's that little boy, Claude, the one who cried when he ate the turkey?" "He is a teacher now," Marie said. "He teaches children about that night. He tells them what you did for us. He tells them what America means." They talked for an hour. James told her about his life, his wife, his 3 children, his ordinary job, his ordinary life in Philadelphia. Marie told him about the village, about how it had been rebuilt, about how the memory of that Christmas had sustained people through hard times afterward. Before they parted, Marie took both of his hands in hers. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What you did that night changed us. Not just the children, all of us. We thought we knew what power looked like. We thought we understood soldiers and occupation and strength. But you showed us something different. You showed us that true power is knowing you could take everything and choosing instead to give. You showed us that real strength is gentle. You reminded us that even in the darkest times, there are still good people in the world. That is what I learned from America. That is what I will never forget." James wiped his eyes. "We just wanted to give those kids a nice Christmas," he said softly. "You gave us much more than that," Marie replied. She returned to France 3 weeks later. She went back to teaching in Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. She continued to keep that photograph on her mantle. And every December, she would take it down and show it to her students, and she would tell them the story of the Christmas when America came to their village. Years later, in 1985, the village erected a small memorial in the square. It was a simple stone marker with a bronze plaque. The plaque read in both French and English, "In memory of the American soldiers who, on Christmas Eve 1944, reminded us what humanity looks like. They gave freely, asked for nothing, and taught us that kindness is the truest form of strength. Marie stood at the dedication ceremony. She was 73 years old then, retired from teaching but still sharp and strong. Claude stood beside her, now a middle-aged man with children of his own. As they unveiled the memorial, Marie thought about everything that night had taught her. She had learned that the world was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than she had imagined. She had learned that goodness could come from unexpected places. She had learned that America, for all its flaws and problems, had raised a generation of young men who believed that feeding hungry children was more important than keeping abundance to themselves. She had learned that the greatest power was not the power to destroy, but the power to give. Most of all, she had learned that a single act of kindness could echo across decades, shaping lives and memories and understanding in ways the original givers never imagined. That was what America had given her village that Christmas. Not just food, not just a feast, but a lesson about what human beings could be at their best. A reminder that even in a world torn by war, compassion could still flourish. A promise that tomorrow could be better than today. She never forgot it. None of them did. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.